I get really excited. I get to like come to work and this is work. Never tell them it's the best. So when I was growing up, the Harry Potter craze hit. And I put off reading the books because it was popular and I wasn't about to be into something that other people thought was cool. Imagine that. But then the religious right evangelical movement started to go on TV and on the radio telling parents not to let their kids read the books. And all the churches in the area were trying to get them banned from the library. Like, do you remember this? And I mean, it was clearly because Harry Potter could only possibly be a cultural phenomenon because of all the evil and witchcraft and devil worship. So naturally, when I heard that, I was like, yeah, I'm going to need to get all of those. And my dad had heard all that same stuff from the people at work and on the news, and he decided that the best way to make sure I was reading something appropriate was just to read it with me, so that we could discuss issues if they came up. Novel concept, I know. But then we both got into the books and it became this thing we did together. And so one day, driving down the road, he's listening to a conservative local talk show on the radio, and the hosts and guests are discussing this same idea that Harry Potter is evil and it's too violent and it's introducing kids to mature themes and witchcraft in this insidious way. And that it's one more way that the culture has shifted from the way things used to be and from good Christian values. So my dad calls in and says, yeah, guys, I hear you. And I'll tell you what, I keep a close eye on what my daughter reads too. And I don't want her reading all that violence and sex and war and genocide and magic and deceit and darkness. So I've banned her from reading the Bible. That's for you, Dad. Thank you. And they weren't really interested in him calling in again. And it's a complete mystery how I ended up like this, right? So maybe you haven't picked up on this, but we like to be kind of careful with the whole Bible thing around here. I know this is going to sound unbelievable, but the Bible has actually been used to hurt people from time to time. Shocker. And we like to be thoughtful with how we read it, because if we aren't careful with what we believe about the text, we start projecting our own biases onto what has perhaps been the most dangerous weapon in human history. For instance, 2 weeks ago on Easter, thousands of pastors read this same text, the resurrection account of Mary Magdalene, and then told their congregations that she's a reformed prostitute, which is not supported by the Bible at all. It's just that attacking a powerful, articulate woman's sexuality is the oldest trick in the book, or not in the book, as the case may be. And when we don't engage the text beyond the superficial level, we get caught up in 2,000-year-old rumors, and we fail to notice the deeper narrative. And for me, for this text, it's about shaking accepted realities. And I'm not actually referring to the idea that Jesus is raised from the dead. I'm actually often with Thomas on this one. The story was already complete for me before the resurrection. The message of Jesus and the way he spent his life was more than enough. And on occasion, this resurrection thing can come off as jumping the shark. But at other times, in those times when I lean into the mystery and wonder of this story, the main reason I buy into the whole resurrection business at all is because a woman saw it. Let me explain what I mean. So one of the ways that biblical scholars assess the authenticity of a text and help us get to a more realistic understanding of the historical person of Jesus and the culture in which he lived is through a few methods of critical examination. For example, they ask, is this story included in multiple texts from the same time period, especially those whose writers had little or no contact with one another? So do multiple gospels include Jesus making the same statement? This is called the criterion of multiple attestation. The more sources that say the same thing, the more validity we can assume about that part of the text. Another example of using criteria is asking, is this story consistent with what historians tell us about life and culture in ancient Palestine? The more we ask these kinds of questions, the closer we can get to the genuine historical moment in which it is written, and the more potential it has to carry insights and meaning into our time and culture. And the interesting thing to me about this text, the resurrection experience of Mary Magdalene, is that it stands up under one of these critical tools. The criterion of embarrassment, or the criterion of dissimilarity, is essentially the idea that we can trust the embarrassing material. The culturally unpopular and uncomfortable texts are more likely to be true. And the idea that this critically important moment in the story, the resurrection of Jesus, would have been witnessed by women before men, by women with no men around to confirm the story, that would certainly qualify as unpopular and uncomfortable. The early church would not have gone out of its way to create or falsify historical material that only embarrassed its author and weakened its position with opponents. The idea that this story was still circulated, told across the region, passed down orally, and then recorded in the text without being changed to better suit its culture, that means that telling this story and keeping it preserved was critical for this community. And regardless of what you may believe about the physical or metaphysical or symbolic or completely fictional experience of Mary Magdalene, this story would have been provocative in its time. In fact, it's provocative in our time. It is countercultural in the ancient Near East to suggest that your God somehow came to earth as a man who was then executed by the state and rose from the dead 3 days later. It is quite another to then try to tell that story to people and then say, oh, by the way, we only found out about the raised from the dead part because a woman told us. Awkward. And after 2,000 years of church history during which women were barred from speaking in church much of the time, speaking at all, much less as leaders or clergy, and in which the text and tradition have been used to oppress women socially and to perpetuate their abuse privately, it is also provocative to read this text today and face the fact that the first preacher in the Christian tradition was a woman. With I have seen the Lord, a woman birthed the tradition. A woman gave life to the story. Women have a way of bearing uncomfortable messages that we may not be ready to hear, but that we know to be true, to be necessary. Their experiences pose provocative questions that unsettle us, and women affirm our hope that being unsettled is the only way to the life beyond our accepted realities. So why are we taking 5 weeks to listen to the experiences of women? And why is it not just about women? Women, like all people at the margins, are uniquely equipped with a perspective, strength, and voice that is shaped by their experience and identity. The Eastern traditions teach so well that God dwells within you as you. God loves and creates and equips people in light of their identity, not in spite of it. And we need to shift our objective from seeking the image of God in the marginalized to recognizing the image of God as the marginalized. I hope that through getting to know women as the bearers of uncomfortable and unsettling stories, we might all come to know that what makes us different gives us purpose and vision, and with that, unique abilities to make an impact in the world. In light of a faith that is built on paradox, that says that love is most embodied in death, that power is turned on its head by surrender, that God is found wherever the oppressed are, we have to reject the cultural narrative that tells us that the locus of truth is with the powerful. When women share unfamiliar or unconventional stories, they invite us to come to know the world more fully and our own humanity more deeply. They allow us to see with new eyes through theirs. And whether they are queer, trans, a person of color, someone with different physical abilities, someone struggling with their mental health, someone from a different nation or economic background, or from any of the innumerable margins of our world, like Mary Magdalene, simply by sharing their experience, they challenge our accepted realities. And that is why feminism that is not conscious of the varying experiences of women and the ongoing realities of privilege at play even amongst women is not helpful and is not capable of addressing the deep injustice of our world. So we aren't just trying to celebrate women this month. In this community, hearing from women and other people on the margins comes pretty naturally. We want to lift up those voices in recognition that this is the exception to the rule. The idea that all people have a meaningful contribution to make and a story worthy of hearing is still on trial outside this room. Just this week, the highest court of our denomination, the United Methodist Church, has ruled that the consecration of our first openly gay bishop, Karen Oliveto, is out of line with our church law. She's suspended now, awaiting a trial to determine whether she can serve in the role to which she was elected in light of her marriage to her wife. It is not a given that everybody can belong, and it is not assumed that every person should be treated with compassion. We have to say every week that no one will ever be turned away because we know that safety does not come standard. We have to name that things are not as they ought to be. It is as true today as it was 2,000 years ago that women have a gift for questioning the status quo. You may have heard the old adage, "The church is a whore, but she's my mother." The quote is attributed to St. Augustine, but we aren't actually sure who said it. It's pretty obvious that a man came up with it, though. And not a particularly creative one at that. Rachel Held Evans is one of my favorite recovering evangelical writers, and she challenges us to take this metaphor and turn it on its head. She says, "It's not that I don't appreciate the sentiment, that despite her persistent wanderings and betrayals, the church births us, feeds us, and names us children of God. It's just that when we leave men to draw all the theological conclusions about a metaphorically feminine church, we end up with rather predictable categories, don't we? Virgin, whore, mother. But what might a woman say about the church as she? Obviously, the idea that the church, or women in general for that matter, must either be a whore or a church is archaic, short-sighted, and incomplete. It's the simplistic duality that you arrive at when you have failed to see the complexity and dignity of the women in front of you. But it is my hope that as we listen to the ideas of women in the coming weeks, that they might help us to understand the world with more nuance, to bring tradition and metaphor, text and justice to life in the way that they live theirs. But let's say that we buy into this metaphor. If we try to imagine that the church is a mother in hopes of what that might teach us. Perhaps she would speak of the way a regular body moves through the world, always changing, never perfect, capable of nurturing life not simply through the womb, but through hands, feet, eyes, voice, and brain. Every part is sacred, every part has a function. Perhaps she would speak of impossible expectations, or of the screwed up notion of purity as status, as something awarded by men with tests and checklists and the power to give it and to take it away. Perhaps she would talk about being underestimated, about surprising people and surprising herself. And maybe she would explain how none of the categories created for her sum her up or capture her essence. Sometimes I think the biggest challenge in talking about the church is holding all of its divergent truths, acknowledging the scars, marveling at its resiliency, and believing that this flawed and magnificent body is enough, for now, to carry us through the world. And the very fact that she gives birth at all is nothing short of miraculous. So let's buy into this metaphor one more time. If we try to imagine that the church is a mother, then if she seems worn out, aged beyond her years, out of touch with her youthful spirit, lacking in expected glamour, bent with effort, tired, scarred, and swollen, perhaps it is because she bore you. These are the demands of carrying your weight, all our weight, of nurturing us at her own expense, of trying to be everything for everyone else and never having the effort returned, never being properly appreciated. Perhaps the church is a mother indeed, and if she is, you better believe she would tell you to watch your mouth when you're talking to her.
Good evening, Collective. My name is Kathy Beasley, and I'm the pastoral resident here at Collective. Now, initially, there was a part of me that was excited and scared to death to fall among the crew that's gathered here in our Badass Lady Preaching series. When I first came to the service back in December, I had a chance to meet Waylon. And Ben had asked me earlier that week to share a couple of preaching videos with him. And Waylon had gotten a chance to watch them. And he came over, he sat next to me, he said, "Girl, you are badass." And I thought to myself, my mother would be so proud. So here I am tonight amongst our Badass Lady Preaching series and engaging the idea of the church that women built. And so I had to spend some considerable time trying to understand what in this realm is mine to do. So I engaged this idea from within that question, what is mine to do? I want to start with a story that comes from Wayne Mueller in one of his books that's called How Then Shall We Live? He tells the story of women in an African tribe, and when one discovers that she's pregnant, they go out into the wilderness, all of the women of the tribe. They pray, they meditate, they laugh, they sing, they cry, and they listen for the song of the child that she carries. When they hear this song, they sing it together. They return to the village. And when the child is born, they all gather together and they sing and celebrate the birth of the child with that song. As life goes on, whether it's the initiation into adulthood or various stages of education, they sing the song. And then alas, when the soul is about to depart this life and go on to its next greatest opportunity, they sing one last time the song of that soul. So it is from within that place of understanding that we are at a point where we are at a rite of passage and understanding the church that women built that I start my journey with you today. I want to look at the idea of the church that women built in three movements: the call, the commission, and the commitment. The call, the commission, and the commitment. Marion Williams says to us, each of us has a unique part to play in the healing of the world. Given that idea that the story of the women at the tomb is supported by each of the synoptic gospels, and then here's John who adds all of the color, all of the texture, and all of the detail to the story that we heard in the reading this evening. The other gospels clearly stand in contrast, but his is distinct and beautifully told. We get to the call. We hear that the call was simple. It was clear and unobstructed by any human emotion, even during her pain, her grief, and her tears. She asked the person that she perceived to be the gardener. She said to him, "Sir, if you are the one who carried him away, tell me where he is and I will retrieve him." Even in her pain, her faith, no, her hope was seeking to understand everything that was going on in that moment. He called her by name, Mary. In that moment, she became the singular first witness to Jesus raised from the dead. She was recognizable by him, and he became known to her. The call of women may have started bound in the duty of being able to care for the dead, but it ever so quickly shifted in grand proportions from have to call to. The call to bear witness to life, it moved her from darkness to light, from confusion to conviction, and from despair to destined. This, my friends, is a church that women built. I believe there is a calling for all of us. I know that every human being has value and purpose. The real work of our lives is to become aware and awakened, to answer the call. Thank you, Oprah. The commission was simple. Go and tell my brothers. She needed to tell them in such a way that her words would steer them to action. She could have simply said, he's back, and dropped the mic. She could have looked at Peter and said, hey, Jesus needs to talk to you about that thing you did. Well, no, the thing you didn't do on Friday night. But she didn't. Instead, she told them about her experience. The telling frames her as the first preacher and the apostle to the apostles. Storytelling is fine, as long as you can encourage people to act on their stories, says Karen Armstrong. Now, I'm sure when Mary Magdalene woke up that morning, she had no idea what was to come. She had no idea that she would be called upon to deliver such a message yet. She did it anyway. In none of the gospel accounts do we find a narrative that involved the idea of her giving pause in the face of the request. As a biblical scholar, I have yet to uncover a translation that included the statement, who, me? Seriously, bro? Slow your roll, Jesus. That is not why I'm here. I'm still looking just in case. In fact, the truth be told, she never really says yes, yep, or I got it. Instead, her actions elevate her narrative as she did as he'd asked, and she hurried off to tell them. Now, I'm sure that she knew the disciples quite well. And even so, she felt no need to qualify the statements with things like, what if they don't believe me? What exactly should I say? The call and the commission for her in that moment, it was crystal clear. Even though the events of the morning were perhaps beyond belief, for her in that moment, they were absolute truth. Because this is the church that women built. Christianity isn't meant to simply be believed. It's meant to be lived, to be shared, to be eaten, spoken, and enacted in the presence of other people. Thank you, Rachel Held Evans. Mary Magdalene neither held on to him nor the news of the resurrection. The call plus the commission was greater than any one person could actually hold on to, because this was a message that certainly bears repeating. We look at the commitment. Whatever is in me is stronger than what is out there to defeat me. Thank you, Carolyn Meese. The church that women built, it is not an edifice or a physical structure that you can stand or kneel within. It can't be found by making a pilgrimage to the intersection of a variable of longitude or latitude. The church that women built is not a set of rules or governance to guide the actions of people. The church that women built does not have a glass ceiling. It does not lock its doors. It does not have a secret passcode that only two people know what it is. The church that women built, it is an idea that hinges on the simple fact that the revolution is not a one-time event. Thank you, Audre Lorde. The church that women built, beloved, it is fueled by love and built upon a rock that is faithful, comprised of stories, of songs, of dreams, of mistakes, of pain, of hope, where the single spiritual practice is openness. The church that women built, it is simultaneously strong and vulnerable. It exists not for the good of itself, but for the difference that it can make and is making in the lives of her people in this world. The church that women built believes that without community, there is no liberation. The church that women built understands that there is no justice if it only benefits just us. The church that women built, it is neither closed for the season nor is it offline due to technical difficulties. The church that women built is still speaking, is alive and well in the hearts of her people. The church that women built is not about power, wealth, or fame, not even about doctrine, religion, or creed. The church that women built is community in and of itself. It's trust, it's integrity, it is hope, it is peace, and is much now as it was then, set in motion for a time such as this, to remind us to listen for our unique and beautiful calls that whisper to us on the dawn of the morning. The church that women built, it holds life itself as a sacred text and sings a vibrant song. The church that women built, it reminds us that religion isn't about believing things. It's ethical alchemy. It's about behaving in a way that changes you, that changes us, that gives us intimations of holiness and sacredness. Karen Armstrong. The church that women built illumines the words of Anne Lamott that says, inner peace does not come from getting what we want. It comes from remembering who we are. Friends, the church that women build is the light of the world. It transcends time and space. She is known by many names and fluent in every language of the heart, the mind, the body, and the soul. She is transparent in essence and fluid by design. The church that women build is capable of tearing down walls and building up hope. She stands clearly and firmly in an unfinished world and answers moment by moment an unfinished calling. As I conclude, I leave with you the words of Nadia Bowles-Weber that says, and this is it. This is the life we get here on earth. We get to give away what we receive. We get to believe in each other. We get to forgive and be forgiven. We get to love imperfectly, and we never know what effect it will have for years to come. And all of it, my friends, is completely worth it. So look around the room this evening, if you will, and realize that we are the church that women built. Amen, and so it is. And so each week, we set this table and we rehearse this meal. Body and blood, the symbol of Jesus' crucifixion. Today, we participate by remembering that the church that women built so long ago is alive in us today. We set this table because we remember in this moment who we are. The bread, blessed, broken, and given to all of us. The cup, filled and poured out into our living and into our love together. This table represents a shared space of surrender. And at this table, no one will ever, ever be turned away. As you are able, rise and come forward and take a piece of the bread and dip it in the cup. And know that we stand together as a church that women build. Come now.